also one of the co-founders and CTO of Gateway. They just also recently launched a product, in the midst of launching a product as a rollup as a service. And he's been telling me that they've already lined up like 100 rollups already. So quite amazing developments. So yeah, this panel will be about scaling Ethereum. But before we kick it off and talk about landscape and recent developments, I think it would be nice to just have a brief overview of why we are actually talking about scaling Ethereum. What are the reasons why we have to scale via rollups? So maybe Hilmar, if because I was present at your talk yesterday, which was also quite adjacent to this topic, would be nice if you could provide an overview of Ethereum as like the historic.
Sure. Hello. Hello. Yeah. Yeah. So I think maybe starting with an analogy, what a rollup is, or how you can think of it in the context of Ethereum, is you can think of Ethereum as kind of like a city or a country, right, that has borders. It is limited in the number of individuals or people that can actually live in this, let's say, city, right? And then you can think of, okay, how can we actually scale cities that have a limited capacity? And you can do it, for example, by building skyscrapers, right? And the rollup you can think of as kind of like a skyscraper that is being built on this Ethereum city. And with these skyscrapers, we can fit a lot of people in there. And people are kind of like analogy to transactions. And how it works more on a technical level is, of course, that you have transactions that have to be executed on networks like Ethereum. And the bottleneck is that you don't want all the nodes of the Ethereum network to have to process all these transactions on the base layer, because you want to have a decentralized network. And yeah, the bottleneck is really like the computing power of these nodes. And that's why with rollups, what you can do is you can just outsource the execution of all these transactions to another network or another server or someone else doing it, not on Ethereum, but still borrowing the security of Ethereum. And this can be done via proofs, by running computation off-chain and then proving on Ethereum that they will actually run in the right way. This can be done by validity proofs or fraud proofs in the optimistic sense. And that's kind of like the broad overview, I would say.
Amazing. And I think it's quite an interesting year also to talk about this topic, because for the first time, Rollups has been executing more transactions than Ethereum mainnet. So it's a very relevant topic, also highly discussed currently. So what does the current landscape look like of Rollups? Maybe if you could also provide a differentiation between like CK and optimistic and what Rollups have the most traction.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting. We probably have to zoom out a little bit and look back a couple of years. I remember, I think in 2020, Vitalik posted this like rollup-centric roadmap for Ethereum. And back then people were also quite skeptical. And I think for a long time, similar with the merge, people said, okay, will we ever see rollups? Will they even work? It's a really difficult technical problem. And then last year, I remember there was this hashtag L222, so L2 2022. And I think a lot of people last year thought that rollups would really take off. But they didn't really. Like Optimism and Arbitrum started out. And I think actually this year it's an interesting time to speak about rollups, because I think this year has really been the year of rollups. So it should be L223 rather, L2 summer. And yeah, so the current landscape, I think there are many rollups live today. The probably two most well known is Arbitrum and Optimism. Obviously Arbitrum had the token airdrop earlier this year, which gave them a lot of mindshare. But I think, the status quo is there's many rollups live today, a lot more coming. You mentioned it. I think we are now at like 3 or 4 times transaction volume on rollups compared to Ethereum. So yeah, we have like 4 additional Ethereums now running above or underneath Ethereum, however you want to look at it. And there's a lot of active research going on like how can we scale rollups, how can we make them more decentralized, more secure, and so on. But I would actually say that just as in 2020, 2021, people are really skeptical of rollups, I think now we're in this like euphoria, and everyone thinks, look, scaling on blockchains or scaling on Ethereum is solved. And I think we want to talk about also like how to value tokens and so on later on. And I would actually take the opposite point right now. I think that people are too optimistic right now and like saying that, okay, scaling is solved, because I think there's actually a lot of hard questions that we still need to solve in like the upcoming months and years. But from a user perspective, what you can get today is just like a lot cheaper transaction fees. So if you go on Arbitrum today and you, I don't know, go on your favorite decentralized exchange, you probably pay like, I don't know, somewhere between 5 and 10, 15 cents, where you used to pay like somewhere between $4 and $20 on Ethereum. So that's probably great.
Yeah, that was very helpful. Maybe before we get a little bit deeper and also talk about the challenges and the obstacles we face, just a little bit more of the semantics. Maybe Igor, since you're very involved in your zero knowledge space, could you provide some context on the differentiation between optimistic rollups, which we see quite like dominant as of today, but they've been like huge developments when it comes to ZK Sync and Polygon, and also other players, Starkware. What are the like differences between optimistic and ZK?
Yeah, and in here, I think the big difference, like if we just starting with the rollups, both types of rollups, they're trying to take as many transactions, execute them as quickly as possible, and just batch them together and send it to the root chain, to Ethereum in that case. What's the big difference is how they prove that they actually did it correctly. Like if we're talking about the layer ones, like Ethereum, even like Bitcoin before that, any blockchain, what kind of protects your like transactions from like being a fraud from malicious actors is the consensus mechanism. So there are many nodes, all of them executing these transactions, and they need to come to the same conclusion in the end, or the majority should come, and then that makes the transaction valid. In case of the rollups, the rollup operator, in case of the optimistic rollup, basically, the rollup operator just executes everything. Everybody trusts him. Apart, there is a certain set of agents or set of like software that looks and feels, oh, there's something fishy. I want to challenge that. And that's basically fraud proofs. They could be different types and stuff. In case of ZK rollups, the roles is reversed. I'm, let's say, as a rollup operator, not only must process this transaction, but also give the proof that every transaction was executed correctly. So instead of consensus mechanism, we get ZK proofs there in terms of ZK rollups. Funny historical fact is that I think ZK rollups were earlier than optimistic rollups, because the first ZK rollups were not this general purpose rollups that we look at today. We look today at ZK VMs or other rollups that can execute smart contracts, but actually the first rollup, the first scalability solutions were already live in 2020. They were like done by Starkware and ZK Sync, like Matter Labs back then. One was called ZK Sync, now renamed ZK Sync Lite, and another was Stark X. And they couldn't execute smart contracts or anything. They were hard-coded to certain operations, and they already worked like basically like modern rollups, but yeah, less flexible, of course. So that's a little bit of a fun fact as well.
Yeah, I just remember a podcast one of the co-founders of Arbitrum has been doing last year, and he was very skeptical of the old ZK developments. For him, it was something to be built like in 5-6 years, and he would think that optimistic rollups would stay dominant for the next couple of years. But now there's been like really recent developments. So Igor, maybe just to continue there, could you provide some like status quo of where are like ZK rollups currently?
Yeah, I think like realistically, the ZK rollups that could spark this adoption only been released basically in the spring. Like there is ZK Sync Era live right now. There is Polygon ZK VM. There is Linea right now from Consensus. Basically 3 of those. Linea was released literally just a couple of weeks ago. So it's very, very early there. Because before that, again, they were pretty much hard-coded. You need to, I want to add this token to this rollup. Ask the core team to do that. And yeah, all these things. So they weren't ready for this kind of mass adoption. So we see traction, again, that Arbitrum airdropped a token, helped them a lot to gain traction. I mean, ZK Sync is doing kind of the same. Polygon doesn't, consensus doesn't, so that's why the growth slope is like much slower than the others. But I think the technology is getting there. Again, we just get first in production something that's even Vitalik thought in like 2020 that wasn't possible to like prove ZK EVM, like prove EVM in ZK proofs. It was basically nobody thought that there's gonna be something like even possible or practical. Again, just within the last year, the proof cost went way down. Like in these prototypes, you need to have like crazy hardware to just even generate a proof of any Ethereum transaction. Now in the new prototypes, you can do it, like if you buy a MacBook Pro from Apple, you can do it there. but before that, it was like nowhere even near. Like you need to have like over a terabyte of RAM, like crazy hard disk, crazy CPUs, and things like that. So it's getting there. I think we are way too early even technologically. So I agree that, I tend to underestimate actually the progress coming from the technical side because I see all the problems too maybe zoomed in. But I still feel like that we need to continue on the optimistic rollups as well and to continue to decentralize them because it's super critical for optimistic rollups to be well decentralized, to have real fraud proofs that actually functioning and stuff like this, because this still is a technology that we'll have for the next, maybe a couple of years or something.
But still, like the two of us, of you, decided to launch Rollup as a service based on ZK technology. So Hilmar, could you give us an explanation of what is Rollup as a service? What problems do you solve?
Yeah, so for us, Rollup as a service really is an approach for solving or catering to a specific hypothesis that we have, which is that you will, I gave this analogy with these skyscrapers in the city, right? And every bigger, like as you see in like New York, for example, every big bank or every big corporate building, like every big company has their own skyscraper, right? And why? Because they have so many people, so much usage, so many people in them that they cannot just fit in the city itself. So our hypothesis is that if we, for the applications that actually get mass adoption and have to process millions of transactions, they all will move to their own skyscraper, to their own rollup eventually. And that's why, and this is the only way how it can work really. This is why we decided to participate in this and help projects build their own rollups, their own skyscrapers. And now we decided to go with the ZKVM framework from Polygon. Why? Because we personally believe in validity proofs being a superior proving mechanism than optimistic fraud proofs. Why? It's all about bridging and withdrawing your assets, right? This is like I look at Rollups basically as like the bridge that you have. That's like the core component of it, and it's all about how do I get the money out again if something goes wrong, right? I want to have my money go in, and I want to have my money come out without having to trust anyone. And this is the core component of it. And with validity proofs, you can basically withdraw your assets right after the proof was being generated and published on chain, and you can get your money out significantly faster than what you can do with optimistic rollups, where you have these challenge periods and you might have to wait 7 to 14 days. Obviously, you can have also other bridges that operate on your rollup, right, to get your money out, but then they have the risk of the money staying in there, right? So there's just a lot more risk associated with optimistic rollups, and we believe that the technology is slowly coming to a point where ZK rollups, as you just said, are basically now slowly becoming production ready, and just from a proving mechanism being a superior model.
I also have a little bit to add here, because we also, if we're talking, especially like, I'm fine with optimistic rollups to be the shared rollups, decentralized, that a lot of people are using. But if we're talking about app chains that are actually being operated by a single company or maybe in a small consortium, that's where this kind of proofs thing is super important, because actually optimistic rollups give away much more power to the operator of the rollup if it's not decentralized than ZK rollups. Like actually, like a, how to say it, an announcement. I will talk after that. I can explain exactly why from the technical perspective. But just take my word for that today. That optimistic app chains. But optimistic app chains, I, for instance, feel uncomfortable giving so much power to the operator of this app chain myself than with the ZK app chain, when I know that I have much more agency as a customer of this app chain.
I really love your skyscraper metaphor. Yeah, but I'm still wondering from a developer perspective, what are the specific benefits you get from building your own app chain versus just building on a general purpose a rollup like Up2 or like ZK Sync and Polygon?
Well, you have, first of all, much more control over certain aspects of how your blockchain, how your rollup works, right? You can have fine-grained control over block times, over finality, like how quickly can you get a response that your transaction was included in the network, right? These kind of things are very important if you think about perpetual DEXs or derivatives training, right? They want high frequency transactions and fast block times and these kind of things. Then the powerful thing of your own rollup or your app chain is that you actually have control over how users can interact with it, right? You can, for example, what ZK Sync does, right? ZK Sync says, hey, we want to have like a native, depends on how you call it, but native account abstraction integrated into the rollup, right? Everyone has by default smart contract wallets, for example, and transactions just get routed differently that they would normally do. So you can have basically control over the transaction lifecycle management. And how I see it, eventually we're not there yet. I think we're very early in everything, but how I envision it is that you have users, you can customize your rollup in a sense that before a transaction gets included and after a transaction gets included, you have these kind of like hooks eventually that you can actually sort of edit and change what has to be done to, let's say, pull in off-chain data before a transaction gets executed to get Oracle prices very effectively on-chain or abstract away the gas cost for users completely, right? You basically now control the underlying execution environment of your application, and you can customize it exactly to your use case, which is much more powerful than being on like a sort of general purpose machine that everyone shares and everyone has to play by the same rules that might not be beneficial for your use case. And a perpetual trading protocol is very different to an NFT protocol. It's very different to a game, what they need, right? And you can really make customizations here. And I think that's the power, and that's what we're already seeing with projects that are building their own rollups. They want to have that fine-grained control, and yeah, I think that's the big part.
Okay, yeah, we're still early, but you also said here, you said we might be overly optimistic or enthusiastic about the current state of the rollup landscape. What are the disadvantages or the problems and challenges you can see?
Well, so, I mean, as Igor mentioned, we probably are going to be stuck with optimistic rollups for a few years, and I don't mean stuck in any bad way, but I think that's just a fact. And I think if you just look at the public discourse, people love the rollups because they're cheap. I think that makes sense. But what people are not discussing, like for example, a lot of people in the Ethereum community are criticizing Solana for not being decentralized. But at the same time, they're praising rollups, which aren't really decentralized today. So that's one issue I'm seeing. And it's if you talk to definitely not the deepest expert in that field, but if you talk to people who are really experts in what it means to decentralize a sequencer. So a sequencer is the agent who basically orders all the transactions on a rollup. It's a very hard task at hand. There's different technical solutions being built, but nothing's really implemented yet. Another thing is, we talked initially when we did the definition of a rollup. I think we talked about that you need these proofs that are stored on chain in order to ensure that actually everything is happening in the right way. For most rollups, these proofs don't exist today. So, they're not posted on chain for all of them. So there's still a lot of things that need to be worked on it in order to really get to this end state, which I think we all agree is good for scaling Ethereum. But I think like just saying today, look, we have rollups, everything's perfect, is a little bit too optimistic. And yeah, I think those are two of the main points I see.
Okay, so we've been talking about technical challenges and the current state. What about like from an investing standpoint? like how do you think about and how do you frame like governance tokens of layer twos?
Yeah, so from an investment point of view, I think it's interesting. I think it's a huge opportunity, but I think it's also super hard because I think we're just at the point where we understand like the L1 economics. I think a lot of people understand now today on how to think about valuation of Ethereum, and you can have certain assumptions, and then you get to a price point where that you think is reasonable. For rollups, I think we do understand the basic business model because it's very simple. You generate revenue through transaction fees. In the future, there might be other revenue sources as well, and you pay some cost to the L1 for storing the data and running some validation of the proofs. And you see today that like Arbitrum and Optimism, I think they have around a 30% margin on that. So one would assume, well, that's a great business model. But I think that doesn't show the whole picture because there's a lot of moving parts today, and that's why I said it's so hard to value those networks. So from the cost side, there's going to be upgrades on Ethereum, which will reduce the cost that rollups have for storing the data on Ethereum by an order of magnitude. So the cost will go down significantly. So one could say, wow, that's great, because then we have like a, 80-90% profit margin, which is not really the case because you also need to decentralize the sequencer. So that basically means you have to share your revenue with other parties. And what we don't know today is how much of my revenue do I need to share. So if I would sit down today and think about how do I model the financial statement of a rollup, or it's super tough because there's just certain assumptions you need to do that you don't know anything about. Another assumption that we don't know anything about is how does the revenue share model in the other way look? So we just talked about app chains, and there's this idea that a rollup is not the end state, but you can actually do another layer beneath the rollup, so L3s, which sometimes also called app chains. And they also might have some sort of revenue share with the rollup. And then there's also frameworks. So you might have heard of Base, which is the rollup of Coinbase, and they're using what's called the OP stack. So that's a framework published by Optimism, and they have some sort of agreement on how Base will share some revenues with OP in the future. But it's super hard to model these things today. So I think what I would look for right now, if I would sit down and value these networks, is network effects. Because I think whoever is able to generate real network effects has some pricing power in the future, and everyone else will be just reduced to, okay, whatever you have to pay for Ethereum and for the decentralized sequencer, you can charge like 5% profit margin on top, and that's pretty much it. Otherwise, like people won't be. You don't have any pricing power in this market with like thousands of rollups. It will be very efficient. So whoever is able to generate real network effects has the pricing power to, I think, have a great business model. So I think rollups overall can be very, very lucrative, and that's why I also think it's a huge opportunity because no one really knows how to value them today, but it's also very hard.
And how do you think about where value will accrue when it comes to the comparison of the rollup versus Ethereum? So one could make the argument that Ethereum as a settlement layer will profit or benefit from all the developments, all the people building on top of Ethereum. But then you could also argue the other way around, that it's more like moving towards the app layer and the tech stack above Ethereum. So how do you think about the implications of the whole developments for ETH as a token?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing it today. I think we mentioned earlier that today we have 4 additional Ethereums just in terms of transaction volume. And I think this will just like exponentially grow in the next years. So we will have like hundreds of Ethereums optimistically. And so all the economic activity that's happening on these rollups will benefit Ethereum as like a settlement layer. There's a question of, how does data availability, who will own that part? But I think from my perspective, I think it's a very net positive. Even though people are today saying, okay, I do not spend my $5 as a transaction fee on Ethereum, but I'll spend like 10 cents on the Arbitrum. Like, how is this good for Ethereum? But I think that's a very short-sighted way to look at it because, 3 years down the road, if I would need to pay $5 on Ethereum, I would go to Solana or go somewhere else. So I think that's innovation is the only ways for Ethereum to stay competitive here. So I think it's very positive to see that. And yeah, I mean, the exact economics, I think, is what I just mentioned. It's super hard to say, like, how will be MEV shared between sequencers across rollups, and what part of that will be shared then, or what part will flow to Ethereum. But there's also this whole idea of like monetary premium, and like if ETH can really like stay the one dominant blockchain ecosystem, and I think rollups are really helping Ethereum to do that. Then I think ETH as an asset will have some premium for this, basically for this strong network effect.
And what about you guys? How do you envision the future? And also, how strong is your commitment to build on top of Ethereum? Or could you also imagine a future where you use other blockchains as settlement layers or other data availability services?
But first, I just wanted to continue on what we discussed before. What Julius told, that I think like coming again from the like core development of Ethereum, the thing you don't want to see on Ethereum is empty blocks, right? So the block space needs to be at premium if you want it to be variable. And right now, any layer 2 that uses Ethereum for proofs or for data availability or for both is a net positive for Ethereum because it fills in the blocks. So you always have gas prices, because otherwise, you see like before rollups how in what was DeFi summer, I think, when you see like gas prices were like you have to pay like $200 to just make some kind of a swap because every block was super full and stuff like this. So that's good for Ether. Speaking of committing to building on Ethereum, I think it's a very good point here, specifically for the proofs in the ZK world, because that's what I consider myself like know a thing or two about. It's very, very important to what kind of layer 2 you use behind it, or we call it root chain as well. Because let's say the proofs, they give you extra security and extra agency as a user of a rollup, but this agency doesn't appear out of thin air. It's getting semi-transferred from the root chain. So if your root chain, if your layer 1 is like super centralized, under control of one organization, they can revert anything there. I mean, you don't have anywhere, like you can have the best ZK technology, the best proofs in the world, but you can't get this agency out of something because it needs to be taken from the L1. That's why, I mean, we at Gateway with Presto, we consider others for, like, let's say, data availability in some cases, not for all use cases for app chains. We maybe even consider like proofs on some other network, but we are super, super picky about how these networks are. So right now, for instance, let's say we're working with Gnosis Pay, and it settles on Gnosis, but Gnosis is also a hugely decentralized network with like hundreds and thousands of validators all over the globe, just like Ethereum. So that means that this layer is pretty, how to say it, decentralized and fair, and that's why we are not afraid to build ZK on top of that. But I don't know, like I wouldn't build a ZK on top of Tron or something like this, right? So that's a very, very careful consideration that's coming into, at least in my head.
Justin Tron would reverse your ZK proof if you wanted to on Tron. So
I'm waiting for somebody to just go and arrest me.
you have to be careful after the talk. No, I think maybe one point to where we are right now on value accrual. I think it's a very interesting point in time, because I see it's sometimes a bit similar to, I think when back then, like when Facebook really went big, like in 2012 or so. Back then, like server, like how to build like server warehouses and data centers, right? It was like a very, it wasn't really, there was no sort of open source planning available where you can actually check how this is done. So you were only reliant on like the Googles, the Amazons and stuff. And if you wanted to build your own custom sort of data warehouse, like you couldn't basically. And so Facebook actually started building themselves and started sort of architecting it. And then they open sourced all the technology available, because they thought, okay, we will actually benefit from others also being able to have like high server capacities and building it themselves. So I think, and then it kind of like created this huge new industry, and a lot of people started doing it. And you got a lot of cloud computing, a lot of data warehouse from different companies, right? And we are right now in a similar stage where these very technical, like these very complex systems like ZK, EVMs and stuff, they have been now open source, they're available, provers are available, right? These things are now open and everyone can take them and build something. So I think who will benefit the most is the applications, right? Because now you can actually, as an application that needs that scale, you can get that scale with an open source technology. You just need someone to run it for you, right? So then I think value, you have to look at the like interoperability between these networks. And as you said, there might be network effects of being early and then everyone using your shared bridge, and then you have some sort of control over it. But I think I'm not 100% sure like where this goes. I think we are in a very interesting point in time. You just have to constantly monitor it. And to the question of Ethereum, of course, I think we're very value aligned with Ethereum, and if there are better technologies out there to achieve something similar, we are of course very open to everything. But yeah, I think right now Ethereum is the place to build your rollup.
What are the current biggest like roadblocks that you guys face? So obviously there's also a huge hardware component involved in your products, resulting in high costs also to deploy your own rollup. You have this debate about shared sequencers. You have this upcoming EIP 4844 that shall provide a new like data type to make it like cheaper for rollups to post data on Ethereum. So how are you thinking about all these challenges?
Yeah, we are very, very early in this rollup world. I think that's important to say, right? I think all these technologies, they're now coming literally available, and you guys as well, right? Like every couple of weeks there are new releases, and things are breaking and things are being upgraded, right? So it's super fresh, super new. So it's just beginning basically. And right now it's still very expensive, right? Not every application should build their own rollup. It's just not possible, right? You need to pay like good money monthly, right, to actually operate these things. And so it very much depends on your scale, right? It very much depends how much provers you have to run. It can vary from like 5 to 6 figures easily, right? So it very much depends on your usage as well. And we also haven't seen that much scale and required, right? So if we have one app chain and it has to generate proofs all the time, and you have like millions of transactions, it's going to be very expensive, right? This is just how it is right now. But there are solutions, right, that are being developed, but it's all like everyone's still deploying their own bridge smart contracts right now. So it's very, we are in this situation where everything is only starting to converge very slowly, right? We are going 5-6 different routes, and only now slowly are we seeing people forming around OP Stack, around Polygon ZK VM, and then maybe some shared bridging. So yeah, it's very messy, it's very early, but I think the solutions are already sort of figured out, or theoretically figured out. It just has to be implemented, and this just takes time and sweat, and probably a couple of years.
Yeah, I agree with everything, and basically one more thing that's, I have some numbers on the top of my head. So to prove a batch of transactions, which could be like in the best case scenario, so to data availability, send them to Ethereum in ZK VM, if the batch is full, it's like 50 transactions, is about $50 per batch, just in Ethereum fees. And then the proof for this batch would be about $9 more. And it's just in Ethereum fees only for validate this proof. And then you have a server, let's say you have enough for one server with redundancies for 2 servers, let's say, to actually generate those proofs. And we are talking in rental prices, even for the good deals, of like $4,000 per month per server. And then you also like, so that's just the cost, pure cost, without any margins on top of that, without making it even a business. And for relatively mildly like useful app chain-ish thing, yeah. And then we also we have this, I've been in cryptography for quite a long time, and we saw all these things when not only the crypto schemas, first we saw the crypto schemas were broken, like with Wi-Fi web, for instance, when just in the early days of cryptography, not cryptocurrency, but cryptography being deployed, right? We see the completely broken schemas being deployed and nobody know that they're broken, right? And everybody relied on them. And then after that, we saw when we got much more mature with modern cryptography, we got also implementations being broken. Like, let's say, if you, funny things or if you put this microphone nearby the, processor that encrypts something, you can actually decrypt it back because the algorithm wasn't adding enough noise to the temperature side or the magnetic waves of the CPUs and stuff like this. So I'm pretty sure we didn't go to that phase at all with the ZK proofs. So we will see probably in the future something on this front for sure. So yeah, these risks are with the new cryptography. It's very, very difficult. So those are the challenges ahead. Again, I don't see them as being like something that in principle stops us from using that or from like using that in the future. But we are going through this very, very difficult engineering phase right now.
One thing I'm very curious to hear your opinion on is the whole topic of privacy. Because obviously ZK can provide like scaling elements as we've talked about, but also privacy enhancing features. Maybe like also from thinking about enterprise adoption, who obviously need privacy features and where we all want them to use public blockchains and not private blockchains. So where are we at currently from a technical standpoint from privacy conserving features for rollups?
Yeah, I think there are multifaceted question, right? But maybe as one example where rollups not L2s come into place is if you, for example, have validiums, right? Validiums being also in layer 2, but rather than using Ethereum as the data availability layer where you post all the transactions, you use another data availability layer where you can store transactions. And these transactions could also be potentially private, right? So you can have a more private data availability committee, let's say, right? Or it could just be you, your database. And that way you don't actually have to publish all the transactions everywhere and you have some sort of privacy as like a side effect to that, which is great. So if you want to have these sort of features, I think there are ways of doing it. Validiums right now, I think, not sure if we, with the ZK VM framework, for example, I think they are only getting ready for like maybe Q1 or so or end of this year. Like we haven't really seen that many in production yet. Maybe first implementations of some other non-ZK VM implementations already did that. But yeah, so this is one way we can do it. And then of course, in general, zero knowledge proofs can be used to create the zero knowledge aspects of them, right? But yeah, I think large scale applications we have yet to see. So
I also seen the application because it's funny because ZK EVM or ZK rollups has nothing to do with ZK aspects of that. It's just a proof of generic computation to be correct, and that's basically it. But we see also new technologies emerging with let's say things like KYC when you just prove some properties without really leaking any information about yourself. We see this privacy coins when it all started, like Zcash and Monero and similar. The challenges on the compliance and legal front there spooked a lot of projects to even go that way. Basically, I don't think we have that many applications in terms of the privacy. So yeah, but I think it also could be like, because I totally see that if we're going with these ideas of Validium, there's totally a space in the future for the new technologies that allow, let's say, for the general public to verify where your taxes go without government having to actually expose exactly where each money goes, but you can actually do some kind of a proof on that using this tech. So it's a really green field right now, especially, and I think I'm not exactly sure that the enterprises and institutions right now understand what could be done there. But again, that's because, it's super, super early right now.
Anything to add? Yes.
Nothing really to add on the privacy side, but I think in general, I think it will take a few years for enterprises to really pick this up. Even the crypto native people are still, some are still hesitant to play around with some of these things. So yeah, I think we need to do this evolution of first the degens or the devs and the degens, then retail, and then at some point enterprises.